She had everything most people could only dream of: a high-rise office, a view of the city that stretched for miles, and the kind of success that came with years of hard work and sleepless nights. But behind that calm, confident smile, there was something most people never knew. There was a story, a secret, and a promise she had carried for most of her life. It began when she was just a little girl. One cold winter night, long before the world knew her as a powerful CEO, she had been trapped in a small house fire. She remembered the smell of smoke, the heat, and her tiny hands shaking as she tried to find her way through the thick black air. She was sure she wouldn't make it, until someone came. She never saw his face clearly in that moment, only a shadow against the light of the flames. She remembered strong arms lifting her up, the sound of heavy footsteps running, and then the rush of cold air as they made it outside. The stranger had put her down gently, told her she was safe, and before she could even say thank you, he was gone. Just like that. No name, no goodbye, only a memory that stayed with her forever. As she grew older, she would sometimes wonder about him. Who was he? Where did he go? Why did he save her and then disappear without a word? She didn't know the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. If she ever had the chance, she would find him and thank him properly. Years passed, and life moved forward. She studied hard, worked her way up from an assistant to the head of the company, and earned the respect of her industry. To the world, she was a woman who had made it to the top through skill and determination. But inside, there was still that little girl who remembered the smell of smoke and the feeling of being carried to safety. When she became CEO, she finally had the resources to search for him. It started small. She hired a private investigator, gave him the little she knew about that night, and waited. But the first report came back with nothing. The investigator told her it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. She didn't give up. If one person couldn't find him, she would hire 10. She placed advertisements, sent letters to local fire departments, and even offered rewards for information. She spoke about the search during charity events, hoping someone might recognize the story. The years went by, but she never stopped looking. Every time she heard a possible lead, her heart would race. There was the man in the small town who claimed to have rescued a child years ago, but when she met him, she knew instantly it wasn't him. There was another in a city across the country, but his story didn't match. Lead after lead turned into disappointment, but she kept going. Her friends told her she was obsessed. Her board members advised her to stop spending company resources on a personal mission. But to her, it wasn't just personal. It was a matter of honor. She had been given her life by a stranger, and there was no price too high to repay that kind of gift. Over the next decade, she spent more than $50 million on the search. Some of it went to investigators, some to travel, and some to organizations that might have had a connection to him. At times, she felt frustrated, wondering if she was chasing a ghost. But then she would remember the fear in her younger self's heart, and how that fear had turned into hope the moment she was lifted out of danger. In all those years, it never once crossed her mind that the person she was searching for might be closer than she thought. She imagined he could be living somewhere far away, maybe in another country, maybe in a quiet little town by the sea. She pictured him older now, maybe with a family of his own, maybe with a life that had taken him far from that night. And so she kept looking. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed, was that the man she had been searching for all those years had been walking past her almost every single day. Sometimes she even smiled politely at him, without realizing who he was. He didn't live far away. He didn't have a new name or a different life. He was right there in her own building, living quietly in the background while she searched the world for him. But that truth was still in the shadows. For now, all she had was the search, the memories, and a promise she refused to break. The search had turned into a routine, almost a second full-time job for her. Every few weeks, a new lead would arrive in her inbox. Sometimes it came from an investigator, sometimes from a stranger who had heard her story in the news. She would read them all carefully, her heart always holding on to a small spark of hope. One week, she was told the man might be living in a small village 1,000 miles away. She traveled there without hesitation, stepping off the plane with a mix of excitement and fear. But after a long conversation with the man in question, she realized it wasn't him. He was kind, and he had saved lives before, but the details didn't match that night in her memory. Another time, the lead took her to a coastal town. She spent 3 days there, meeting someone who claimed to have been in the fire. But again, it wasn't the right man. Each wrong turn left her a little more tired, but never enough to stop her. Her office team began to notice how much time and energy she poured into this mission. Some admired her loyalty. Others whispered that it was a waste. But she didn't care about their opinions. She knew why she was doing this. Meanwhile, in the background of her busy corporate world, there was a man in a faded uniform pushing a mop through polished hallways. His shoes squeaked softly against the marble floors. He never interrupted anyone, never spoke more than a quiet good morning or good evening. Every day, she passed him without much thought. Sometimes she would nod politely, sometimes she didn't notice him at all. Her mind always lost in board meetings, contracts, and the endless search for the man who had saved her. To him, she was the powerful woman at the top of the building, untouchable, always surrounded by assistants and important visitors. He had no idea she was looking for someone like him, and she had no idea he held the answer to the question that had kept her searching for years. Her search wasn't just about finding a person anymore. It had become a part of who she was. It gave her a sense of purpose that went beyond business. In her heart, she believed that meeting him again would close a chapter of her life that had been open far too long. And so, she kept pouring money into it. She hired more investigators. She set up interviews with retired firefighters and rescue volunteers. She funded community projects in neighborhoods where she thought he might have once lived, hoping someone would remember his name. But no matter how far she traveled or how much she spent, the answer was never there. The truth was quietly mopping floors in her very own building, so close that if she had stopped for even a minute to talk to him, everything would have changed. At least that moment was coming. She just didn't know it yet. He was used to being invisible. That was the way he liked it. His work started early in the morning before most people arrived, and ended late at night after they had all gone home. He swept the hallways, wiped down the glass doors, and kept the lobby spotless. People passed him all day, but they rarely noticed him. That didn't bother him. He wasn't there to be noticed. Years ago, life had been different for him. There had been a time when his hands didn't hold a mop, but tools, fixing things and building small projects. But after a string of bad luck and a few choices he wished he could take back, he had ended up here, a quiet janitor in a tall office building, earning just enough to get by. He didn't talk much about his past. The people who worked in the building knew him as polite, reliable, and always on time. That was enough. He never needed to tell them about the moments in his life that had shaped who he was, moments like the night he had carried a little girl out of a burning house. In his mind, that night was something he didn't revisit often. He had been younger then, faster on his feet, and he had acted without thinking. One second he was walking past the street, and the next he was inside the smoke-filled home, following the sound of a child's cry. When it was over, he left quickly, disappearing before the chaos of sirens and reporters could pull him in. He never expected to see her again. Now, years later, he mopped the floor just outside her office every morning, never realizing she was the same girl. Sometimes, as she passed him, he would glance up for a moment. She always looked focused, carrying folders or speaking into her phone. He figured she was just another boss, busy with her own world. To her, he was simply part of the background, the quiet man in the corner of the lobby or the one dusting the elevator buttons. She never connected him to the memory she held so tightly in her heart. But life has a strange way of bringing the right people together at the right time. And even though neither of them knew it yet, the distance between them was shrinking. Every day, without realizing, they were getting closer to the moment when the truth would come to light. For now, she kept searching everywhere else, and he kept cleaning the floors right under her nose. It was one of those evenings when everything seemed to go wrong at once. The sky outside had turned a deep gray, and rain hammered against the tall glass windows of the building. Most of the staff had already gone home, their voices and footsteps fading into the echo of empty hallways. She was still in her office, finishing a report before an important meeting scheduled across town. She grabbed her coat and stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby. The doors closed, and the elevator began to hum softly as it descended, until it suddenly stopped. There was a faint jolt, then silence. She pressed the button again, then the emergency one. Nothing happened. The only sound was the rain outside and the low creak of the elevator cables. Her chest tightened. She wasn't afraid of small spaces, but she didn't like being trapped when she had somewhere important to be. A moment later, the doors opened just slightly, enough for her to see someone standing outside. It was the janitor, the same quiet man she had walked past countless times. "Looks like the elevator's stuck," he said in a calm, steady voice. "Don't worry, I've already called maintenance. They'll be here soon." He stepped inside to wait with her, leaning slightly against the wall, as if he had done this sort of thing before. At first, they spoke only about the rain and the delay, the kind of small talk people make when they're strangers. But slowly, the conversation began to shift. He mentioned that the weather reminded him of a night many years ago, a night with heavy rain and flashing lights. He spoke softly, almost to himself, about a fire in a small house, and how he had gone in to save a child. Her breath caught for just a second. She looked at him more closely now, as if trying to see past the years. "That's quite a story," she said carefully. He nodded. "It's nothing really. I just happened to be there. I never saw her again after that. I just remember she was scared, and her hands were shaking." She felt her heart pounding in her chest. Those words, that detail, it matched her memory, exactly. She didn't say anything yet. She didn't want to believe it too quickly. But something deep inside her told her this was more than just coincidence. The rain kept falling. The elevator stayed still. And in that small, quiet space, two lives that had been running side by side for years were finally starting to face each other. She didn't want to rush it. The last thing she wanted was to scare the moment away with too many questions at once. But her mind was racing. Every sentence he spoke felt like a piece of a puzzle she had been trying to solve for decades. She leaned a little closer, her voice softer now. "Do you remember anything else about that night?" He paused for a moment, his eyes distant as if he was looking through time. "I remember the smell of smoke. I remember the heat. And I remember finding her in the corner of a small bedroom. She was crying, holding a blanket. I told her not to be afraid. Then I picked her up and ran. When I got her outside, I told her she was safe. Then, I just left." Her throat tightened. That was it. That was exactly how it had happened. She could still feel the texture of that blanket in her tiny hands, still hear the calm voice telling her she was safe. She looked at him carefully, almost afraid to ask the next question. "Why did you leave? Why didn't you stay?" He gave a small, almost shy smile. "I didn't think it mattered who I was. She was safe, that was all that mattered. Besides, I didn't have much then. I wasn't anyone important." Her eyes began to blur with tears. For years, she had imagined their reunion happening in some dramatic, faraway place. A small town, an old cafe, a crowded street. Never in her wildest thoughts had she pictured it happening in an elevator, with the rain tapping softly outside, and the man standing there in a worn janitor's uniform. "You've been here all this time," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've been searching for you for years. I've spent half my life looking for you." He looked surprised, almost embarrassed. "For me? Why?" "Because you saved my life," she said, wiping her eyes. "And I never got to thank you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of the weight of all the years lost, and all the years they didn't know they had been so close. The elevator doors finally slid open with a soft chime, but neither of them moved right away. She stood there, still holding his gaze, as if afraid that if she stepped out, the moment would slip away, like it had all those years ago. "I owe you everything," she said quietly. "Without you, I wouldn't even be here. You didn't just save a little girl that night. You gave her the chance to live, to grow up, to build everything she has now." He shook his head gently. "You don't owe me anything. That night, I didn't think about what it meant. I just saw someone who needed help. Anyone would have done the same. She gave a small, bittersweet smile. You might believe that. But I know the truth. Not everyone would have run into a burning house for a stranger. They walked slowly out of the elevator together, the lobby quiet except for the faint hum of the lights. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at him as if trying to decide what to say next. Then, in a voice firm but full of warmth, she said, I want to help you. Whatever you need, a home, education for your family, medical care, anything. Let me do that for you. He hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I've gotten by just fine. I'm not used to things being given to me. This isn't a gift, she replied softly. It's a thank you, one that's been waiting a very long time to be said. Finally, he nodded, not because he wanted the money or the opportunities, but because he could see how much it meant to her to give them. In that quiet agreement, something shifted between them. They were no longer strangers passing each other in the hallway. In the weeks that followed, she kept her promise. She made sure he had everything he needed, a better home, a stable income, a chance to do work he truly enjoyed. He accepted the changes slowly, humbly, never losing the quiet dignity that had always been a part of him. For her, the search was over. The weight she had carried for decades was finally gone. And in its place was something new, a friendship born out of a single moment of bravery years ago, now given a second life. Sometimes, when she passed him in the building, she would remember the little girl in the smoke-filled room and the man who carried her out. Only now, when their eyes met, they both knew the truth. And they both knew how rare and precious it was for fate to bring two people full circle after so many years. It was the end of her search and the beginning of a bond that would last the rest of their lives.